Iran's oil exports just flatlined. Not slowed, not reduced. Flatlined. In the span of 72 hours, the Islamic Republic went from shipping 1.7 million barrels per day to effectively zero. No explosion rocked the Strait of Hormuz. No naval blockade appeared on satellite imagery. No government claimed responsibility. And that is precisely what makes this so dangerous. When Iran's economic lifeline gets severed and nobody knows who did it, you are not looking at a conventional military operation. You are looking at something far more sophisticated, far more invisible, and far more terrifying for every oil-dependent regime on the planet. Welcome to States News. If this is your first time here, subscribe and turn on notifications, because what I am about to show you is not just about Iran. This is about a new category of warfare that just went operational, and it has implications for every nation that depends on moving resources across water. I am going to walk you through exactly what happened to Iran's oil infrastructure in the first week of April 2026. We will cover the technical capabilities that make this kind of invisible interdiction possible, the strategic calculus that explains why someone would execute this operation without claiming credit, and the second-order effects that are already reshaping how nations think about economic security. By the end, you will understand why this represents a fundamental shift in how power gets projected in the 21st century. More importantly, you will see why the mystery of attribution is not a bug in this operation. It is the entire point. Before we dissect what just happened, you need to understand why Iran's oil exports matter at a level that goes beyond simple economics. This is not just about revenue. This is about regime survival, regional influence, and the entire architecture of how the Islamic Republic projects power across the Middle East. Iran sits on the world's fourth largest proven oil reserves, roughly 208 billion barrels. For a nation under comprehensive sanctions since 1979, with intensified restrictions following the 2015 nuclear deal collapse, oil represents the only significant hard currency generator the regime possesses. When economists talk about Iran's oil dependence, they are describing an economy where petroleum exports account for approximately 80% of total export revenue and fund roughly 50% of the national budget. Strip that away and you are not looking at economic difficulty. You are looking at potential state collapse. The 1.7 million barrels per day that Iran was moving before this operation represents a carefully constructed workaround to international sanctions. This is not oil being loaded onto supertankers at well-lit terminals with proper documentation. This is a shadow fleet operation involving ship-to-ship transfers in international waters, systematic falsification of cargo manifests, and deliberate disabling of AIS transponders to avoid detection. China serves as the primary destination, absorbing roughly 90% of Iranian crude, despite official sanctions compliance claims. The transaction mechanisms involve a complex web of front companies, cryptocurrency settlements, and barter arrangements that allow both nations to maintain plausible deniability. The Strait of Hormuz, that narrow channel between Iran and Oman, serves as the physical choke point through which this oil must flow. At its narrowest point, the strait measures just 21 miles wide. Roughly 21 million barrels of oil pass through daily, representing about one-fifth of global petroleum trade. Iran has spent decades developing capabilities to threaten closure of this waterway, viewing it as strategic leverage against Western pressure. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy operates a fleet of fast attack craft, anti-ship missile batteries, and mine-laying capabilities specifically designed to interdict traffic through the strait if Tehran decides to escalate. That is the strategic context that makes what just happened so remarkable. Iran built an entire defensive doctrine around controlling this choke point. They invested billions in capabilities designed to threaten global oil flows. And then someone made their own exports disappear without firing a shot, without blockading the strait, without creating the international incident that would normally accompany this kind of economic warfare. Now let us talk about what actually happened, because the technical details reveal capabilities that most defense analysts did not think were operationally deployed yet. On April 3rd, maritime traffic monitoring systems registered the last confirmed Iranian oil tanker departure from Karg Island, Iran's primary oil export terminal located roughly 25 miles off the coast in the Persian Gulf. The vessel, a Suezmax-class tanker with a capacity of approximately 1 million barrels, followed standard Iranian protocol. AIS transponder disabled shortly after departure, no declared destination, scheduled for ship-to-ship transfer somewhere in international waters beyond strait monitoring range. The ship never made that transfer. According to satellite tracking analysis published by Tanker Trackers, a maritime intelligence service that monitors Middle East oil flows, the vessel altered course approximately 180 nautical miles southeast of Karg Island and returned to port. Not due to mechanical failure. Not due to weather. The cargo was simply not transferred. That same day, every other Iranian-flagged or Iranian-controlled vessel capable of hauling crude oil exhibited identical behavior. Ships already at sea returned to port. Scheduled departures never occurred. The entire export apparatus just stopped. Here is where it gets genuinely interesting. The Iranian ships did not stop moving entirely. Smaller vessels continued routine operations. Naval patrols proceeded normally. Civilian traffic in Iranian ports showed no disruption. The targeting was surgically precise. Only vessels involved in oil export operations ceased functioning as intended. Within 48 hours, Chinese port authorities began reporting unusual communication from expected Iranian crude deliveries. Ships that were scheduled to arrive were not responding to standard coordination messages. When Chinese officials contacted Iranian shipping companies, they received confirmation that vessels had departed on schedule, but provided no explanation for why transponders remained dark and ships were not proceeding to destination. By April 6th, the first commercial satellite imagery analysis emerged from Maxar Technologies, showing something remarkable at Karg Island. Roughly 12 to 15 tankers, representing the majority of Iran's available export-capable fleet, sat anchored near the terminal. Not loading, not departing, just sitting. The terminal's loading infrastructure showed normal activity levels. Oil was clearly still flowing from inland production to coastal storage. But nothing was leaving. Now think about what that means from an operational perspective. This is not a blockade where external forces prevent movement. This is not a sanctions enforcement operation where ships get intercepted and turned back. This is Iranian vessels, under Iranian control, in Iranian territorial waters, simply not doing what they exist to do. And nobody at the regime level is explaining why. The most significant detail comes from signals intelligence reporting published by Radio Free Europe, citing unnamed Western intelligence sources. According to their analysis, Iranian vessel command and control systems experienced what they described as systematic interference beginning April 3rd, not jamming in the traditional sense where communications get blocked by overpowering signals. Interference that made navigation systems provide incorrect positioning data, made encrypted communication channels unreliable, and made automated cargo management systems behave unpredictably. Here is the technical capability that makes this possible. Modern tanker operations depend entirely on integrated digital systems. GPS provides positioning. AIS transponders broadcast location and cargo data. Satellite communications enable coordination with port authorities and buyers. Automated ballast and cargo management systems control ship stability and loading operations. All of these systems are networked, often using commercial off-the-shelf components that prioritize functionality over security. What we are likely looking at is a sophisticated electronic warfare operation targeting the specific digital systems that Iranian oil tankers depend on. Not destroying them, not permanently disabling them, just making them unreliable enough that operating the vessel safely becomes impossible. This is fundamentally different from traditional electronic warfare. Jamming is loud. You flood an area with electromagnetic noise and everything stops working. Attribution is obvious because the source is detectable. What appears to have happened here is something far more subtle. Targeted interference that looks like technical malfunction rather than hostile action. GPS receivers getting position fixes that are off by miles. Communication systems that connect but cannot maintain stable encryption. Cargo systems that report incorrect tank levels. From the crew's perspective on each vessel, this looks like cascading technical failures. From the Iranian regime's perspective, this looks like improbable coincidence affecting their entire export fleet simultaneously. But coincidence does not target only oil tankers while leaving every other vessel category unaffected. The strategic implications of this capability are profound. For decades, the basic equation of naval power involved visible platforms. Destroyers, submarines, carrier groups. You could photograph them. You could track their movements. You could attribute actions to the nations that operated them. Electronic warfare changed that equation somewhat, but jamming is still attributable because the jamming signal has a detectable source. What we are seeing here is attribution-resistant economic warfare. No platforms to photograph. No jamming signals to trace. Just a fleet of ships that mysteriously cannot operate reliably. Tehran cannot credibly blame a specific adversary without admitting their ships are vulnerable to capabilities they should have defended against. They cannot demand international intervention without revealing systematic technical vulnerabilities. They cannot even acknowledge the problem publicly without spooking the Chinese buyers who might decide Iranian crude is not worth the operational uncertainty. Think about the second-order effects already in motion. China imports roughly 1.5 million barrels per day of Iranian crude sold at steep discounts to market prices because of sanctions risk. Those imports just evaporated. Chinese refineries built to process Iranian heavy crude now have a supply gap. They can replace it with other sources, but not at the same price. The economic relationship that allowed Iran to survive sanctions while giving China cheap energy just got far more complicated. Iran's oil revenue funds Hezbollah in Lebanon, Houthi operations in Yemen, Shia militia groups in Iraq, and Assad regime support in Syria. The entire Iranian axis of resistance across the Middle East depends on Tehran's ability to generate hard currency from oil sales. Take that revenue away, and you are not just affecting the Iranian government. You are degrading Iranian proxy capabilities across multiple conflict zones simultaneously. This has already started manifesting. Reports from Beirut indicate Hezbollah financial offices have implemented emergency austerity measures. Payments to fighters have been delayed. Social service provision that the organization uses to maintain political support is being scaled back. Yemeni Houthi officials are reportedly requesting direct weapons shipments to replace cash payments they can no longer receive. The entire financial architecture of Iranian regional influence is under stress. But there is another dimension that deserves attention. Whoever executed this operation chose to remain unattributed. That is not an accident. That is a strategic choice with specific logic. In traditional military operations, attribution serves multiple purposes. It demonstrates capability. It delivers deterrent messaging. It satisfies domestic political demands for visible action. Countries claim credit because the credit itself has value. Here, someone is achieving strategic effect while deliberately avoiding credit. That suggests the operation's value lies not in the demonstration of power, but in the uncertainty it creates. Iran cannot retaliate against an unidentified adversary. They cannot rally international support against aggression if they cannot identify the aggressor. They cannot adjust their defenses if they do not know exactly what capability they are defending against. This is asymmetric warfare inverted. Usually weaker actors use asymmetric tactics because they cannot match conventional forces. Here, a sophisticated actor is using attribution resistance precisely because they are capable of effects that would normally require conventional force projection. They are choosing invisibility when they could choose visibility. Now let us acknowledge what this operation has not accomplished, because understanding limitations matters as much as understanding capabilities. First, this has not destroyed Iranian oil infrastructure. The wells still produce. The refineries still operate. The storage facilities still hold millions of barrels. The moment whatever is interfering with tanker systems stops or gets countered, exports could theoretically resume. This is a reversible effect, not permanent destruction. Second, Iran still has options. They could attempt manual navigation without GPS. They could operate vessels with crews willing to accept higher risk. They could try transferring oil to non-Iranian vessels at Iranian ports rather than at sea. These workarounds exist, though each carries operational costs and inefficiencies. Third, the international response remains uncertain. If Iran publicly claims they are under electronic attack, some nations might view this as unacceptable interference with commercial shipping. International maritime law protections could be invoked. The invisible nature of the operation that provides attribution resistance also means Iran could attempt to frame this as broader commercial shipping vulnerability requiring international action. Fourth, this capability, whatever it is, likely has range and duration limitations. Electronic warfare systems require power, positioning, and maintenance. If this is a deployed capability rather than a permanent installation, it needs to be sustained. At some point, operational costs or technical constraints might force whoever is executing this to either claim credit and shift to conventional enforcement or withdraw and allow resumption. From Tehran's perspective, there are several possible interpretations. This could be a warning shot demonstrating vulnerability before more kinetic action. It could be an attempt to pressure Iranian nuclear program concessions through economic pain. It could be preparation for broader regional operation by degrading Iranian revenue before conflict escalation. Each interpretation leads to different response options. The Russian perspective also matters here. Moscow depends on Iranian drones for the Ukraine conflict. They need Tehran financially stable enough to maintain defense production. A financially strangled Iran is a less useful Russian partner. But Russia's ability to provide technical assistance to counter sophisticated electronic warfare is limited. They face similar vulnerabilities in their own naval operations. Chinese officials must be calculating whether Iranian crude at discount prices is worth the operational uncertainty this incident reveals. They built refinery capacity specifically for Iranian heavy crude. They have investments in Iranian oil infrastructure. But they also need reliable supply chains. If Iranian shipments become genuinely unpredictable, Chinese energy security logic might demand diversification regardless of price advantages. What remains genuinely unresolved is the sustainability question. Can whoever is executing this operation maintain it indefinitely? Electronic warfare is not a fire-and-forget capability. It requires ongoing effort, resources, and positioning. If this is being executed from platforms, those platforms need maintenance, crew rotations, and resupply. If this is being executed from fixed installations, those installations are potentially targetable once identified. There is also the escalation question. Iran's leadership faces a choice between accepting this economic strangulation or attempting dramatic action to break it. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has spent decades developing anti-ship capabilities specifically to threaten the kind of sophisticated naval operations that might be supporting this electronic warfare. They could attempt to target suspected platforms or installations, but doing so without clear attribution evidence risks appearing aggressive rather than defensive. The technical adaptation question looms large as well. Once Iranian engineers understand exactly what vulnerability is being exploited, they can potentially develop countermeasures. This might involve shielding critical systems, developing redundant navigation capabilities, or implementing electronic warfare detection systems on tankers. The timeline for such adaptations would be months rather than days, but the possibility exists. Here is what has fundamentally changed. For decades, the basic equation of economic warfare involved either kinetic strikes against infrastructure or international sanctions requiring diplomatic coordination. Both approaches are visible. Both are attributable. Both create opportunities for the targeted nation to rally international support or develop visible countermeasures. What just happened to Iran demonstrates a third category: attribution-resistant technical interference that achieves economic effects without destruction, without requiring international coordination, and without providing clear targeting for retaliation. The operation's invisibility is not a limitation. It is the core strategic advantage. This has implications far beyond Iran. Every nation that depends on maritime commerce now has to consider vulnerability to capabilities that can interfere with shipping operations without blockading ports or sinking vessels. Russia's oil exports, China's container shipping, the entire architecture of global trade moves on digitally dependent vessels that might be vulnerable to similar techniques. The deterrent implications are equally significant. If you are a nation considering aggressive action, you now have to factor in the possibility that your economic lifelines could simply stop working without warning and without clear attribution. Traditional deterrence involved threat of visible retaliation. This is deterrence through demonstrated vulnerability to invisible interference. The balance of power in the Middle East just shifted in ways that are not fully visible yet. Iran's ability to fund proxy forces, maintain alliance networks, and project regional influence all depended on oil revenue that is currently not flowing. How long can Tehran sustain operations without that revenue? How long can Hezbollah maintain force readiness without regular payments? How long can Houthi operations continue without Iranian financial backing? We are watching in real time as economic warfare evolves beyond traditional tools. Sanctions require international coordination and enforcement. Blockades require naval presence and create escalation risks. What just happened requires neither. It achieves strategic effect through technical sophistication and deliberately avoided attribution. Watch what happens next with Iranian nuclear program negotiations. Watch whether Tehran suddenly becomes more willing to accept deals they previously rejected. Watch whether proxy forces across the region begin scaling back operations as funding dries up. Watch whether China starts publicly distancing from Iranian oil purchases to avoid association with operationally unreliable supply. This operation, whatever it is and whoever is executing it, just demonstrated that the future of economic warfare is not louder or more destructive. It is quieter, more technical, and far harder to defend against. Iran thought their oil exports were protected by geography, by shadow fleet operations, by strategic ambiguity about buyers and routes. They were wrong. And every nation that depends on moving resources across water just received the same message. If this analysis helped you understand why invisible economic warfare represents a fundamental shift in how power gets projected, subscribe and turn on notifications. We are covering the technical dimensions of electronic warfare capabilities next, and you will want to see exactly what systems make this kind of operation possible. The world just got more dangerous in ways most people do not see yet. We are going to make sure you do.